Laws and customs dictated where millions of people could sit, walk, learn, eat, and even drink water. These were the Jim Crow laws, an entire legal order designed to divide, degrade, and deny. Signs once dictated where a person could simply exist. Whites only, colored, words that claimed authority not only over space but over dignity. Why focus on Jim Crow? Because it was not just a set of rules. It was a deliberate strategy to deny humanity, opportunity, and dignity to millions of African Americans. Understanding Jim Crow is essential to understanding racism, resistance, and the long struggle for justice in the United States. With such a system in place, we are forced to confront a deeper, more moral question. What does justice demand when a society's laws deny the humanity of millions? To answer this, we must look at the history, and then look through the lens of one of philosophy's most influential ethical frameworks, Kantian ethics. The story begins in 1865, when the Civil War ended and nearly 4 million Black Americans were emancipated. Reconstruction brought new rights, but also intense backlash. When federal protection faded in 1877, Southern states began crafting a new racial order. By the 1890s, segregation was written into law. In 1896, the Supreme Court upheld segregation in Plessy v. Ferguson, declaring that the separate but equal doctrine was constitutional. This decision legitimized a system that permeated housing, education, transportation, healthcare, voting, and employment. Jim Crow was not isolated discrimination, it was systemic, built into legislation, enforced by courts, reinforced by police, and normalized through culture. This context exposes how racism becomes institutional, weaving itself into the everyday lives of entire communities. Looking at the system in practice, schools for Black children received far less funding, public transit required separation, voting rights were dismantled through literacy tests and poll taxes, Black workers were pushed into low-paying, exploitative labor, Black defendants faced all-white juries, violence, both state-sanctioned and vigilante, enforced the social order. These conditions shaped not just individual experiences but entire generations. Educational disparities, economic inequality, and political exclusion created long-term effects still visible in today's racial wealth gap, housing patterns, and criminal justice disparities. Jim Crow shows how oppression becomes a system, legal, cultural, economic, and deeply personal. To understand the moral failure of Jim Crow, we turn to Kantian ethics. Kant argues that morality is grounded in two principles. One, the universal law test, which states a moral action must be based on principle that could apply universally. Could segregation be universally applied as a moral law? Absolutely not. It destroys equality and elevates one group's rights over another's existence. 2. Respect for persons. Every human must be treated as an end in themselves, never as a means to an end. Jim Crow treated African Americans as a tool for maintaining white supremacy using their labor, restricting their freedom, and denying their voice. Thus, Kantian ethics reveals the core immorality of Jim Crow. It violated human dignity, moral autonomy, and the basic ethical requirements for any just society. Applying these principles to Jim Crow reveals the profound moral failure. Segregation laws cannot be universalized. If every society separated people into superior and inferior classes by birth, justice and equality would disappear. Such a rule produces a contradiction. A legal system meant to protect people instead harms them, violating the very purpose of the law. Ultimately, it is a categorically immoral, violating the core duty to respect the humanity of all persons. Historians, legal scholars, and philosophers have analyzed Jim Crow from many angles. Some Southern defenders argued segregation preserved order or tradition, but these claims collapse under ethical scrutiny. Moral philosophers across the political spectrum agree that laws denying equal moral status cannot be justified. I drew on 5 main sources: C. Van Woodward's The Strange Career of Jim Crow, Douglas A. Blackmun's Slavery by Another Name, the Supreme Court's Plessy v. Ferguson and Brown v. Board of Education decisions, Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, and the textbook by Sidney Banks. The effects of Jim Crow echo in today's criminal justice system. Racial disparities in arrests, sentencing, policing, and incarceration reflect the same logic, the systemic devaluation of Black life. Jim Crow's legacy is visible in racialized policing patterns, school-to-prison pipelines, voting restrictions, housing segregation, and unequal educational opportunities. The past shapes the present. What can be done to prevent injustices like Jim Crow from reappearing? Evidence-based strategies include strengthening voting rights protections, reforming policing through accountability, transparency, and community oversight, expanding equitable school funding, investing in historically marginalized neighborhoods, teaching accurate U.S. history, including segregation legacy, and supporting civil rights organizations that monitor discrimination. Anti-racism requires active policy change, not just awareness. The most eye-opening part of researching Jim Crow was realizing how ordinary it once seemed, how legal language disguised cruelty, how courts justified oppression, and how millions endured injustice that many Americans refused to see. It is humbling to confront the truth that the law itself can become immoral, and it is inspiring to learn how courage, resistance, and ethical clarity ultimately dismantle that system. Understanding this past is not an academic exercise. It is a call to reflection and action. For whenever any group is denied equal moral worth, Kant's warning echoes: a society that violates human dignity undermines the foundation of its own moral law. We look back not to dwell on division, but to strengthen our responsibility, to build a world in which equality is not a privilege granted by law, but a right recognized by all. Kant reminds us that justice requires treating every person as an end in themselves. Our responsibility is clear: to confront the past, challenge injustice in the present, and build a future where laws protect dignity rather than deny it.